Hey GenderqueerChat, it's Matt. Happy 2013. It's not Monday, I'm very late this week again, but I don't think anybody else has posted yet, so technically if you think about it, it's still Monday in a round. I'm first, so we'll pretend it's Monday. So this week's topic is really cool. It is, we're discussing the term queer and what place or what meaning does the term queer, if any, have in our lives in regards to our identities, gender, sexuality, or however. So yeah, the term queer for me is a pretty important one, and it's one that took me maybe the longest time to get to a place where I felt okay with using it and applying it to myself. Possibly because the term queer comes with its own, well, for me personally, when I first came across the term queer, it came with its own set of connotations, which meant something very different to how I sort of perceive it and view it now. But yeah, I find it a really useful term. It's kind of almost a kind of default term that I feel that I can use to apply to myself for a variety of different situations and kind of identity ideas. When some of those other ones become cumbersome or difficult to explain, or depending on your audience, may not be the best or terms to use at the time. So gender-wise, I identify as queer. Like, I identify as genderqueer, and if you were to ask me what my gender is, I would respond as genderqueer. But once I kind of worked out that word, sounds obvious, once I worked out that word was like, you could separate it into two parts, the gender and the queer, that kind of made a lot of sense to me. And to be able to label my gender as queer, which to me, in that sense, means something distinctly other than strictly male or female in a heteronormative sense, breaking free of that binary, queering up my gender kind of, that helped me make a lot of sense of it and makes me feel comfortable. So yeah, I kind of use the terms genderqueer and queer interchangeably when talking about my gender, and that feels like a really good place to be. In regards to sexuality, kind of similar. So I do use other terms to describe myself, my sexuality, my vision of myself in relationships or interactions with other people. I do have other terms that feel comfortable that I like to use and have used or will use in certain scenarios. But more and more I find the term queer as kind of an umbrella overarching term, but also like the backbone to like this part of my identity is really useful. I know people use the term queer in a lot of different ways when dealing with sexuality or within the communities of different groupings of sexualities. I know that people have lots of ideas about what queer means historically and now, but to me it's kind of just this term that you can use that could mean almost anything. To me queer says more about what it's not than what it actually is. So for me, queer kind of means that something other than strictly heteronormative or conventional, but for what it actually is, it could be anything. There's a myriad of different kind of identities and ways of expressing yourself and different sexualities and ways of being. And I think queer is this kind of more encompassing, accommodating, flexible, fluid space, which people have, people who just sort of, are out of that normal kind of sphere of conventional human existence can sort of inhabit and appreciate and not necessarily need to justify themselves, which is an important part for me, because while I do use other terms, I feel that if I use the term queer, I don't need to quantify that. I don't need to explain that to people in the sense of trying to prove or justify my sort of personal use of that term or my place within that community, whereas some of the other terms, to correspond with the letters of the LGBT community, are probably a little bit more rigid and less fluid, and in some ways a little bit ironically heteronormative. And so yeah, I feel like to take on one of those labels, to use one of those labels for myself, or to be a part of one of those communities, even though I do find them welcoming, there is that sort of, if you don't fit into it 100%, if you're not particularly what people would expect from a person who uses one of those, brands themselves with one of those letters, then that can be kind of a little bit uncomfortable and unsettling. So yeah, queer on the other hand is that kind of more flexible, all-encompassing thing, so I like it for that. I also like to refer to my relationships as queer, if not verbally or explicitly. I like to think of them myself within relationships as queer, and that kind of, you know, frees up a lot of stuff as well, like again using those other identity terms. But once again, the term queer, it doesn't say much, but it kind of says a lot, and it kind of points out what you're not rather than what you are, and I think that's important. And I like, you know, labeling myself in these different facets of my being and identity with kind of this term that can be a little bit changeable and mutable and open to interpretation. But yeah, so queer is definitely a term that I have become very attached to, and you know, it's been a process over time, but I definitely feel like it's the term. It's both like an overarching umbrella kind of thing, but it's also kind of the backbone of my identity, and you know, gender, sexuality, everything else is kind of queer. I like that. I like that queer kind of implies that you're a bit of a misfit. You don't quite, you know, fit into, you know, conventional organisations of people and stuff, and I kind of like that, and I think that's a perfectly fine place to be. And I also like how you can kind of, at least in my case, kind of walk amongst, you know, normal heteronormative society, but still be queer. Like, I like that you can kind of go incognito a little bit, and you know, still, you know, hold on to your queer identity, and but pass as a, you know, regular member of society. Yeah, that's just the way I think of it. Anyway, really cool topic, and hopefully somebody else will post this week, guys. If not, you got me. So, and thanks to Christina as well for Christina and Quincy and Joe and Zane Laura Gabriel for really stepping up and kind of keeping us all together for the last few weeks, because we've, at least me personally, has been a little bit shaky with posting videos, so it's been really great that the others have stepped up and yeah, given us some videos to watch, so thank you so much, and great videos and great topics, and it's been awesome. So yeah, that's enough from me, so see you next week, guys.